Today on Thinklete, we're diving into one of the most important conversations in youth sports. My guest is John O'Sullivan, author, speaker, and founder of Changing the Game Project, an organization dedicated to helping parents and coaches create environments where young athletes can thrive. John is the author of two influential books in youth sports, Changing the Game, The Parent's Guide to Raising Happy, High-Performing Athletes and Giving Youth Sports Back to Our Kids, and Every Moment Matters, How the World's Best Coaches Inspire Their Athletes and Build Championship Teams. He's also the host of the Way of Champions podcast, where he's interviewed some of the most successful coaches and leaders in sports, including national championship coaches, Olympic athletes, and some of the most respected minds in leadership and performance. In his TED Talk, Changing the Game in Youth Sports, John shares a powerful truth. Youth sports should be about developing kids, not satisfying adult expectations. Because the reality is, sports should build confidence, character, resilience. But too often, pressure, comparison, and adult agendas get in the way. Today, we're talking about what the best coaches in the world actually do differently, how parents shape a child's experience in sports, and how we can create environments where kids don't just perform, they grow. John, welcome to Thinklete.
Hey, Derek, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it and appreciate the kind introduction.
Well, this is a pleasure, and I'm super pumped to get into this. If we could, let's start off. Let's just, if you could talk a little bit about your background, how all of the projects and everything you're involved in sort of came to be.
Yeah, so you and I we're both East Coasters, and I grew up. I'm 54, so I grew up on Long Island in an era where you got to play lots of different sports, and I'd play soccer and basketball. I was a wrestler. I played baseball, and you're always doing something with your buddies in your town, and then followed the soccer path to college and a little bit of professional soccer, and then into coaching. And back when my kids were really young, and I started looking at this through the eyes not just of a coach or executive director of an organization, but as a parent, and going, man, like sports not like like it was when I was growing up. And that's kind of how Changing the Game Project was born. And you decided to research and write that first book, Changing the Game, and actually currently working on my fifth book right now. So it's about to release that here this June or so. And it's like, I knew in the beginning, Derek, when I started this, and I'd be on an airplane and sitting next to someone, and they asked me what I did, and I said, I work with schools or sports clubs, and I help parents make the experience better for their kids, and I work with coaches on creating a more athlete-centered environment. No one ever said to me like, "Oh my God, that's stupid." They all said like, "Oh man, you need to come to my school." My kids' school. You need to come to my kids' club. And so I knew I was kind of onto something. And yeah, so 14 years of this now, traveling around, it's not just a North American problem. So I travel all around the world and teaching, coaching and parenting and leadership development and team culture development. It's really fun. I feel very privileged that I get to do this every single day.
That's amazing. Now, how do you go about getting the organizations, the sports organizations or the schools or whatever, on board with what it is that you do? Because sometimes I think what I have found, again, and I found it more in the youth generation, youth sports, local little leagues, local football organizations, there's a little bit of pushback when they are presented with an opportunity to develop their coaches, like develop their leaders, give them a tool set to help better communicate with certain players on their team, or deal with certain behavioral issues differently on their team. Have you ever experienced that pushback that, hey, we're just going to kind of let our coaches do it the way they want or the way our school tells them to do it? Like, how do you combat that, I guess, for lack of a better word?
Well, usually, the people who would hire me would be the coaching director of a club or an athletic director from a school. So they're saying, hey, guess what? We're going to do this thing. Now, I've seen every scenario from, I've flown across the country and showed up, and there's 6 coaches in the room. And I'm like, where is everyone? They're like, oh, they're at practice tonight. I'm like, why'd you bring me here then? Like, like this, like practice is more important than this event of, and you just invested this time and money to get me here. So that always kind of blows my mind. But I've never been in a room where someone's not sitting there with their arms crossed thinking, oh, this is stupid or whatever. Like, man, that happens a lot, and I just, you can't just stare at them. Like there's lots of people nodding their heads and understanding, like, I get this. And now, we've done 470 plus podcast episodes, and Hall of Fame coaches, World Cup winners, NBA champions, Super Bowl champions. No one ever says, oh, you guys are full of it. They're like, no, that's it, man. Coaching's about relationships. And we're really good in coaching education about uh, giving people drills and tactics and X's and O's and physical stuff. But we don't teach them that coaching is a relationship business. And even the research is that, like, the foundation is your knowledge, but coaching effectiveness is completely driven by interpersonal skills, right? And if you're not developing those things, you're falling behind. And I really believe that, like, for a lot of coaches to hear this, it's actually a relief. Because, like, last week, I had 80 little league coaches here in Bend, Oregon, where I live, right? And I said, raise your hand if this is your first year, and probably a third of the room first year coaching. So keep your hand up if you're worried you don't know enough about baseball or softball. And most of the hands stayed up. I'm like, well, hopefully at the end of this, you'll realize that if you understand humans, understand people, you're going to be just fine. Because if you can spell Google, you can get all the baseball practices you need.
That's true. That is true. There's YouTube videos out there everywhere. Also too, the coaches being able to take that added step and also not only build relationships with their players, no matter what the age they are, but also build a relationship with the players' parents. One thing that I like to do is literally have a sit down with the parents, a couple sit downs with the parents, one before the season starts, before we even have the first practice, and then periodically throughout the course of the season, basically just to say, what is it that you are looking to get out of this? Like what type of experience do you want your son or daughter to have? And then kind of shape the way that we go about it as coaches to sort of tailor that family's, I guess, goals. And it seems to work pretty well. I think that constant communication always works well. But again, I think it also shows that you're more concerned about the development of the athlete versus just the winning and the losing, right? The result.
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest things too.
Yeah. And I think as well, like, parents get a bad rap. I think most parents understand that their kid's not going to play in the major leagues or, turn pro, and they want a good experience. And, one of the things that I talked about in that first book you mentioned, Changing the Game, start at the end. Like, when you're putting your kid in youth sports, think about what you want your 25-year-old to be like and look like. What do you want them to gain from this? Now, no one says, oh, I hope they tear their ACL 3 times and have 2 concussions and, get bullied by coaches and terrible environment and we spend all our money. Like, no one says that. So it's like, okay, so let's take a step back and then know where you want to get to. Well, is every decision, every organization we're signing them up for working towards what that future child is going to be? So, for example, my 2 kids, their mom was a Division I athlete. I was a Division I athlete, but we're like, sports is going to be, the purpose of it is to develop great human beings. And we want them to learn to have leadership roles, and we want them to learn to do hard things. And so when they make the B team, it's not a nightmare. It's a good thing. Like, there's a little adversity. How do you respond to that adversity? And, who's your coach and how do they treat you and all that sort of stuff. Like, being very cognizant of all leading towards, I want my kids in their 20s to be athletes for life, right? Not have a bunch of injuries that are debilitating them. And obviously some of that's out of your control, but, can look back on sports as a positive experience. And if they had the drive and the desire to try to play at the next level and the next level, like that's up to them.
Hmm.
I can't give them that. I can't give them that hunger and that willingness to go, you know what, I'm going to skip all the parties in high school and get up and go to the gym and like that's got to come from within, not from without. And
Hmm.
so I just think for parents listening, like start at the end. What is the purpose of sport in your kid's life? And then work backwards from there and do your best to have all your clubs and camps and training and decisions align with that.
So that's a great point, and it jogged me to think about. I guess the personal experience that we sort of go through. My wife was also a Division I athlete. She was a soccer player at Drexel University and played some professional soccer as well after that, and then coached at the Division I level too. And then my background being similar on the baseball side, I think there's this maybe it's ego, I don't know, but it's like, hey, we were this, so our kids naturally should also be in sort of line with how we did it, right? Maybe it's how we worked and got persevered and the adversity and how we dealt with it. Granted, my kids are younger than yours, but there's this always kind of this frustration, I think, sometimes that arises because the expectations that we set on our kids are based upon the path that we had, and for us to have to say, well, why don't we just let them kind of be their own person? It's a lot easier said than done. I would be curious when you were, when your kids were, a little bit younger, because I believe you said you have was 18, 19-year-old or 17,
They're
18 year
they're
old.
both in college now, yeah.
They're in college now. For like maybe the younger family, right? The 8, 9-year olds, even younger, 10, or older, a little bit older. What would you think? What were your thoughts? What are your thoughts kind of on that? Or how did you sort of handle that, when you were
Well,
in that stage?
I mean, I agree that there's a little bit of ego around it, right? And then lay upon that, what I do for a living, which is like, athlete development stuff and whatever. But when you get your ego out of the way, it's like they get one childhood. It's their path. So like I could talk about like my daughter who at 10, 11, be like 12, I want to play college soccer. Great. What do you think someone who's going to play college soccer is doing when they're not at practice? They're practicing on their own.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. How are you going to do that? Right. And then so there was this kickback wall in our neighborhood. And then, she would go there for like 2 or 3 days and then would stop going. Right. And then 2 months later, and so my job as a parent, I think, was just to be honest and be like, listen, I hear what you're saying, but your actions are not matching what your ambition is. And that's okay because no one has to be a college athlete, but don't kid yourself into thinking that that's the path you're on if you're not going to do and you're not going to put in the work to get there.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and then eventually, she was like, you know what? Like, yeah, I don't want to do that. But I want to be a good high school player, right? And you can still be an all league or all state high school player and, you know, captain your team and have a great experience without that sort of next level ambition. And so I think that's where parents can say, "Hey, that's it." But I mean, I think the worst thing we can do is A, live vicariously through our kids, or
Mm-hmm.
B, think that their athletic performance is a reflection of our parenting skills because it's not, right? It has
Absolutely.
nothing. If they're a good person, respectful, honest, hardworking, fulfill commitments, that's a reflection of parenting, not they scored 20 goals or, batted 450 this season.
Yep. I think there's this saying, it's at least one of the sayings that I remember growing up was used towards me and one that I also have used towards my sons. It's what you do when no one's watching, right?
Hmm.
So it's to your point, will you take initiative to go out there and, get some practice in on your own without being told to? That to me is when there's something a little bit different about their potential drive. But then there's a fine line because, you know, you also don't want to, I think if there's nothing else besides that particular sport, that obviously leads to burnout, right? The older that they get. And I think, that's a huge issue, obviously, in new sports, as well as they approach the teenage years. But again, that's when they start to do things on their own, that's when that, okay, I, that you can push buttons a little bit, but not too hard, not too hard.
Yeah, and I think your goal and your role when they're younger is to develop the human being and the athlete, right? So the character development, but also the athletic development. So it's so easy as a parent to get sucked up into, we're only going to play soccer, or we're only going to play baseball, or whatever. But the best people they're the best athletes first, right? And so when they're younger, having a I used to say like multi-sport experience, and I'm careful with my words, because yes, that's true, but people then turn that into becoming multi-sport specialists, right? So now they're balancing basketball, soccer, and baseball year round, and that's terrible for kids as well. So different sport per season, when they're younger. So now I say multi-movement experience, right? So if you really, really, really love baseball, that's fine. That's awesome. But how else are you moving so that you're developing as an athlete? Strength and conditioning, yoga, parkour, doing other stuff in different planes is so absolutely critical, because what happens is the kid who plays only baseball and gets very one-sided in their batting and their throwing and all that, you can get away with that until puberty, and then you go through this growth spurt, and then it exposes who's the good athletes and who is the good baseball player, right? Because then you start getting hurt, and when you get hurt at 13, 14, 15, 16, it's really hard to make up those practice hours, and those are the training hours that matter much more than 6, 7, 8. And so that's where people fall behind. And, I had a kid that I coached for 4 or 5 years in soccer here, who just, he was a first round Major League Baseball draft pick last year. And I would go to his baseball games. There'd be 12 Major League scouts at his baseball games, and they would come talk to me. And every single one of them was like, one of the things we love about him is that up until he was 15, he played soccer and basketball and baseball. And he's just a great athlete, and he's aggressive from those other sports, and he's got all these other things. And we think there's an upside there because he hasn't poured every ounce into baseball. So he's less likely to get hurt. He's more likely to continue developing. And, that was consistent. No one said, oh man, we're really worried that he didn't play enough baseball when he was 10.
Yep. And, it's for me, growing up in the Northeast, being originally from, the Philadelphia area, obviously now being in Florida, we don't really have the seasons. It's just hot, but, not being able to be outdoors all year round up in the Northeast growing up, it almost, it like helped you almost be forced to play multiple sports, because, you couldn't play baseball year round. And then they started building, these indoor facilities, and, things changed, right? Now they have them today, and you can play a sport all year round. Down here in Florida, it's like a gift and a curse. The weather's beautiful, but you can get trapped into, well, my kid, for example, one of his favorite sports is football, right? So he plays tackle football in the summer, but now he's playing flag football, for 2 seasons in a row. And the next thing we know, it's a summer again, and we're getting ready for flag football. Now, I go back and forth on this a lot. I actually was having this conversation the other day, and I'm glad that you brought it up. The concept of playing multiple sports, multiple athletic movements, versus one. Now, one of the things that I personally deal with my son, again, who's 9, is the fact that he has struggled finding activities and sports that were conducive to his skill set in the way he just is wired, right? And this past year, really, the whole football thing really took off for him. But it didn't take off for him because he's naturally physically good at it. It took off for him because now he's socially fitting in, making friends. Now the coaches are recognizing him for his aggression, his, like the things that, like, he's now gaining confidence, and it's really helping him. So now as a parent, it's hard because every other sport that we or activity that we present to him, hey, let's try this, buddy, we're met with a no, because
Mm,
how good football or whatever sport, I mean, for him it's football, but like, that sport makes him feel
yeah.
mentally. So as a parent, then it's like, okay, how do we push that button to get him to try something new? Now, I like what you said about the movement aspect, because we've thought about, hey, track and field, like he's done like Brazilian jiu-jitsu before, like things like that
Mm,
to kind of parallel the football aspect. But even that, sometimes it's met with pushback, because he knows how good he is with football, and he knows how much confidence he has now that he struggled with in the past. He knows his friends are knocking on our door now. They want to play with him because of how cool they think he is. And it's hard for us now as parents to be like, hey, let's stop that for 3, 6 months and try something else. So that there's a struggle there.
yeah, and this is the reality, and I think I forget how old did you how old did you say
This
that
one is
son?
this one is 9.
9, right? And so where the analogy I use sometimes is if your 9-year-old said to you, um, I only want to eat pizza every night, that's it. You'd be like, no, like you need to eat vegetables, you need to eat different food in order to develop healthy, right? And so I think when you're faced with that situation, and I hear this a lot from parents, they only want to play soccer, they only want to play football, this or that. It's like, well, let's look at some athletes that you think are really good football players. Let's see what they did. Oh,
Hmm.
look, they played baseball. They did track and field. They did these other things because it helped them and it keeps them fresh so that they're excited about it. And guess what? Like, you will learn a different role. You'll be a better football player because you're trying something new here. Now, you don't have to make your kid do this at 14 or
Hmm.
15, but when they're young, like just trying to do different things or yeah, and football, right? Like flag football, I love. I'm not a huge fan of tackle football for 9-year-olds. I think there's a lot
Yeah.
of evidence that it's really not good for them. And so if you were saying, "Oh, we're playing tackle football year round," I'd be like, "Man,
No
I
way.
wouldn't do that," you
No
know.
way. Yeah.
But I do think that I do think that, just okay, how can we enhance this and just, hey, we're going to try things fun. Now, again, it doesn't mean that you have to sign them up for another team that says, okay, I'm taking you away from this or whatever, but like go rock climbing, ride
Yep.
bikes, do any other form of movement and show, hey, that can be enjoyable as well. Just in case there's something that you like, how do you know you won't like it if you won't try it? So I think it's you're balancing this, and I think your thoughts about your son are really important. Like, right now he's thriving, so I don't want to
Yes.
take him out of something that he is thriving and it's building his self-esteem and his confidence. And at the same time, I also know, hey, it's going to be important to develop athletically. How might we do that? Football is a pretty, it's, again, it's not like baseball where you're swinging the same way and your body, or and throwing with one arm and your body develops an imbalance. You're probably developing a pretty balanced athletic profile playing football. But yeah, I just think, it's go back to the pizza analogy, right?
Yeah.
Too
Yeah.
much of one thing isn't necessarily a great thing right now.
Yeah. Yep. And it's interesting you you brought up rock climbing, and actually where we live there is a rock climbing wall in the amenity center, and that is something that he does love to do a couple days a week as well. So we are
And
intentional about.
that's another sport. I mean, as a
Yeah.
parent, like that's another sport. It's different movements, it's flexibility, it's strength, it's problem solving. So that's okay. Like
Mhm.
we have to stop thinking that, oh my God, if I don't sign him up for travel basketball, he's not
Yeah.
having a multi movement experience.
Yeah. And the travel sports aspect is a whole other whole other ball game in this. I see it here in Florida with travel baseball specifically, and I just the amount of time that these families spend and money that they spend to travel all over the state every weekend. And I don't know. For me, it's not really worth it right now, at least where they're at in their development. And I'm talking about kids that are, my son does not play baseball, but just peers that he has and how they go about it with their families. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's tough. So
Yeah,
I would
and
be curious.
he's young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. No, I would be curious though. I mean, you know, what are some like it's kind of in just your knowledge, what are some of the main aspects that parents get wrong today in youth sports?
Um, that you have to do more, younger, right? So that we need that we're gonna fall behind. Now listen, like sports, your genetics are your ceiling, right? So you can't coach a kid to be 7 feet tall,
Yep.
right? If parents are really tall and the kid's tall, they're going to have an advantage in basketball, and there's nothing that you can do about that, right? But it's like, so this panic to do so much so young to keep up rather than develop as an athlete. Number two, this overemphasis on childhood performance. So looking at any athlete and how they do prior to puberty is a terrible predictor of how they're going to do later on. Now, if I see a kid dominating early on and their parents were, truly elite athletes, and so they can teach them about the mindset and all that, yeah, that kid's probably going to keep doing well, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so many kids, right, happen to be born in January and they're just bigger, stronger, faster than everyone for a bunch of years. And everyone goes, man, they're so good. Terrible predictor. And this has been proven in every single sport that, if you're born within 3 months of whatever the calendar cutoff date is, you're more likely to make the A team. You're more likely to be picked as an all-star or whatever. But once kids get to 17, 18, 19, maybe a little younger for girls, all the physical things even out. And now a lot of times it's the late developers or the late born kids who make it. So
Yep.
we put so much emphasis and pressure on kids when they show something early on, but it's just a really terrible predictor. And those kids, they can feel that pressure, and then all of a sudden when people start catching up, a lot of those kids end up quitting because they're not dominating anymore, and they think their worth comes from being really good at baseball or really good at soccer
Yep.
or whatever. And they were just good because they grew first or they were a
Yeah.
little bit older. So that those are the two big things I see.
That's a great point. I'm a big believer in the physical aspects are only going to take you so far, and everybody's going to catch up to you and ultimately surpass you. For example, I remember being 12 years old and having two kids on my team who are both 6'2", and they threw the hardest, hit the ball the farthest, and they were obviously little league, superstars, right? But not one of them played baseball past, I think, like 10th grade.
Yeah.
And whereas we had, three other players who were later developers, myself being one of them, that ended up playing much longer and, beyond college. So, I'm a big believer in that the physical is only going to take you so far. And then the mental aspect is really what differentiates you from being, good to like elite. And I would be curious on that because like we talk about when kids are able to develop that aspect of persevering and grit, the word grits that is used today. And, when when the mental connection or the mental toughness or however we want to phrase it starts to come into play, like with your kids being the ages that they are now, when did you start to see that, little like shift maybe happen? Or maybe some of their teammates that have, are on trajectory to have great careers, or maybe some athletes that you've, worked with. And, you mentioned the player that was a first round draft pick a few minutes ago. Like when did you kind of start to see those things sort of click?
Well, I think number one, what you see in the kids who make it is intrinsic motivation. So it's not mom or dad forcing them to do all this stuff. It's driven by them, right? Um, Number two, like the baseball kid Slater, he was just a super competitor. I remember
Mhm.
like going to watch him when my son was on his team, and I was just a dad on the sideline, and they knew I was going to take over and coach the next year. And the parents, and so like Slater was the most competitive kids. He's flying around the field, he's slide tackling, he's knocking kids down, he's making them cry at 10 years old, 11 years old. And the parents, a couple parents are like, "Oh, you're going to coach next year. What are you going to do about Slater?" I'm like, "I don't know, like clone him, make more." Like, that's a good thing. It's not a thing that you like coach out of someone. You're like, that's amazing. We can teach you how to redo that. But
Mhm.
like, um, you just see it, and you just see, both my kids were kind of like late developers. My daughter was a December birthday in a sport where January 1 was the cutoff. So she was always the smallest, always the youngest until she was like 15. Right. And then all of a sudden she grows at 15 and she's a sophomore in high school and she's starting on varsity. And everyone's like, wow, she got so much better. I'm like, she just finally grew. Like a lot of these kids grew when they were 12 or 13, and she finally grew now, right? So there's that. And my son was also kind of a late bloomer as well, and finally, like his senior year, junior year, senior year of high school, he fell in love with the weight room and working out, and then
Mhm.
felt strong and wanting to be physical and everything like that. And it's just like everyone's on their own path, and comparing your kid's path to someone else's path
Yeah.
is a
Yeah.
terrible thing, because they're just a different human being. But I think you as a parent, you really look at like, what, are they internally driven? Because if it's extrinsic, they're probably not going to make it, right? It's
Mhm.
if it's intrinsic, if how do they face mistakes? Are they resilient? Do they just keep showing up? Do they look forward and just go next play, next play? Like a lot of these things we can teach and enhance, but a lot of them come from within. I don't think you can do something to make your kid one
Yep.
of these super driven kids. Now you could demand stuff and sign them up and do it, but you're probably more likely for him or her, when they get to a certain age, to just be like, yeah, I'm not doing this anymore, I quit.
Sure.
Or I would meet kids who didn't want to do it anymore, and they would have these like really weird, hard to diagnose injuries, like my back hurts or things like that the doctors couldn't diagnose. And for me, it was like, they really just don't want to play anymore, and they don't know how to tell their mom and dad that they don't want to play
Mhm.
anymore. um and so it's just, you want your kid to be hungry and excited and want to go to practice. And
Yes.
if all they do is practice, 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 like this myth of the 7 day a week grind is it's not really the way to develop the best
No.
athletes. You have to recover, you have to take time off, and then be excited when the season starts up again.
Exactly. Our thing is, and for both of our kids, it's, whatever activity you want to do that you don't, that they don't, uh, get frustrated when it's time to go to practice. Like, what are they getting ready for themselves? Like, they're putting their uniforms on, they're getting their bags out, they're getting their equipment together. We're leaving on time. If there's things like that, and it's not us having to quote unquote force them to do it, and they
Yeah.
enjoy going out the door and going to that event or that game, that practice or whatever, then I feel like that takes the pressure off of the parent because we know they're happy.
Yeah.
Um, I would be curious this, not switching gears a little bit, but thinking a little bit about like maybe from the parent, I guess the parent and the coach's angle. But so let's say, the kids on the field. So let's say your team your teams you've coached, for example, kids on the field that are physically talented, like physically they are maybe even the best on the team,
Hmm.
but they are maybe more emotional, right? So, it's like they're very emotional when there's failure, or maybe they're trying to be perfectionist, or your team loses or they get beat. It's emotion, strong emotion. Now that, like, as a coach, right, I think it's tough because you could translate that as like, this kid, like what you just said a second ago, maybe this kid doesn't want to be here actually doing this, but at the same time, maybe they're just being like really hard on themselves and haven't understood or learned how to deal with failure yet. Um, because, but again, we're kind of giving them that benefit of the doubt because they're so good physically, like they're excelling. So it's like, how do you balance that? And like, what if a coach has that scenario? Because I'm sure there's coaches that do, where like, hey, this kid's the best player on the team, but every time something goes wrong, they're crying, or something. Like, how do you balance that? How have even some of the coaches or athletes maybe that you've talked to throughout your journey, like, has any of that come up?
Yeah, I mean, and I think there's a lot of parts and nuance to this answer, right? So,
Mm-hmm,
number one, I think that um, I am very careful about the word talent, right? Like, I think what we see is physical ability, but for me, talent is not what you see; it's what you see plus these character traits like
mm-hmm,
resilience, like grit, like teachable spirit, all these sort of things. That to me is talent, because those things that you control, like being willing to be coached, working hard, committed, integrity, all that, you control those things. And those are very big predictors of how good you're going to be. So I I sometimes cringe when people are like, "Oh, that kid's so talented." I'm like, "I don't know, he just runs fast."
mm-hmm,
Right? So I think that's part of it. And then number 2, like there's a lot of nuance to why is that kid upset when they lost, right? Are they just super competitive and don't know how to express it, and maybe they've won a lot and now they're in a bigger pond and they're losing and they're not quite sure how to deal with it. This is why I think it's really important that kids lose when they're really young. Like, you don't want to lose every game. That's discouraging. But you do want to lose enough that you just go, okay, now I can learn from this. Now I'm going to get better. And I mean, that's a really important part of it, right? And then I think number 2, um, there could be something behind that, like, oh my God, every time I lose, I get in the car, my dad yells at me for losing. Well, that's a very different reason for being crying or upset or yelling at my teammates.
mm-hmm.
That is not a healthy thing, right? And so I think the worst thing we can do is tell kids, oh, you shouldn't be upset. Like, you shouldn't feel strongly. Like, that's not, like, of course I feel strongly. That's as damaging as, oh, you shouldn't feel nervous or you shouldn't be stressed. Like, sport is uncertain. I don't know how it's going to go. So if I care, I'm going to have a little bit of anxiety about this, and that's okay. Right? That's okay. I have to learn how I have to build the capacity to still take action when I'm feeling butterflies, when I'm nervous, when this game means a lot. So telling people don't be upset, don't be angry, don't be this, don't be that is not really helpful. It's like, well, why are you feeling that? And what can you learn in this moment? Right. So I
Yeah.
always like advise parents, like, if they have a kid who gets really upset when their team loses, and or when the team wins but the kid feels like he or she didn't play well, is like, be consistent. So after every game, when you have a conversation, preferably not in the car ride on the way home, but ask them like the same 3 questions, like, well, what do you think went well for you today? Because something went well, right? And what do you think didn't go as well? What do you need to work on? And then what's one goal for practice this week? So when you go practice, like, what's one thing that you learned today that you can get better at, right? And that little framework allows a kid to understand there's always good, there's always something to work on. And then if I set an intention for practice this week, that's how I get better, right? The best athletes go to practice with a plan in mind of what I'm going to get better at today. And the other ones just go to practice. And then afterwards you go, how did you get better? Well, I don't know. Right. But
Yeah.
someone who's really good can go, yeah, I was really focused on this turn in swimming, or I was really focused on scanning before I got a ball in soccer. And yeah, that made a big difference today. I definitely felt I played better.
Yep. I heard in one of your talks, and I feel like I can relate to this too, about the car ride home. I think you had mentioned that your wife kind of slapped you when you were about to talk to one of your children when they were younger after the game, and I've gotten that too. And I remember growing up and getting that from my father as well.
I'll give her credit,
But
say she didn't slap me, but she did go, wait a second.
yeah, give you the put her arm. But I think that that's such a crucial time. I mean, it's not even, it's also, it's coming home from the game, but it's also like going to the game as well. My son has this thing where he gets really quiet, and it's him being nervous, right? He just gets really quiet and he almost doesn't want to talk.
Mm,
And that's fine. And after the game's over, his wind down period is again quiet. Let's give it some time before we have any conversation about that particular game. And that's fine.
yeah.
So I would be very curious from the coaching perspective. What are some, I guess, key, I don't know, key takeaways or messages that a coach could take from this conversation, or your experience, to really say, hey, I'm going to listen to this podcast episode or maybe one of yours, and they're going to be able to put this to use rather quickly to help their, not only their individual players, but their teams in general.
Yeah. So a couple things for coaches. Like, number one, building upon this idea of the car ride home, the coaching version of that is your post game talk. What do you absolutely positively have to say in that moment when it's emotional? People are already feeling bad. They know you lost, whatever. Like, we have to be very conscious and cognizant and intentional about it. And I think saying less is better. Do you have to say that today, or can you wait until practice on Tuesday when the emotion is gone and we can say, okay, what did we learn from this? Right? As coaches are older and coaching high school or college, watch the film first before you really start critiquing it, right? Get a good, because the film doesn't lie. So maybe it was better than you thought it was. Maybe it was worse than you thought it was, but be consistent. Like, that's what athletes want, is consistency. Number two, well, I'll give you two things, like two quotes that I think are really the best coaching advice. Number one, you coach a child, not a sport, right? You coach a human being, and every one of them needs something different. And some of them need discipline, and some of them need a hug, right? Some of them need higher standards because they don't get that at home. And some of them just need, freedom to enjoy themselves, right? So that's number one. And then number two quote is Maya Angelou, right? People don't remember what you said and they don't remember what you did, but they always remember how you made them feel. So as a coach, how am I making them feel? And I always say to coaches, like, one of the best ways to evaluate how you're doing is, would I want to be a player in this practice? And if your answer is no, you probably shouldn't do that again, right? Oh, but we have to cover these things. Now, yeah, you know what? If I'm a tackle football coach, there might be a practice where we're standing in line more and we're teaching proper tackling technique from a safety standpoint so people don't get hurt. Amen to that, right? Like, that might be a practice, like, we need to cover this because this is important. But if the kids are standing in line and you're talking all the time and whatever, and you're going, well, we just need to do this to get ready for the game. If you're doing that over and over, kids are just going to quit. Like, they have a lot of other things they can do. So would I have liked to be a player in this practice? And if the answer is yes, then it's probably a pretty good practice, right? So how I feel, by how the coaches treat me, by the team dynamics, by the quality of the practice, all those things contribute to joy and fun.
Mm-hmm.
Fun has to be the thing that drives it all. If it's not fun, they're not coming back. I don't care how much make it fun, because that's why they're there. And there's a lot of professional coaches out there coaching at the highest level. Steve Kerr, the one who comes to mind, who's like, number one value of the Golden State Warriors is joy. If it's not fun, why are we doing this? So if the Warriors can win championships focusing on joy, then your 9-year-old football team should be having fun too.
Very well said. John, it's all about having fun. If not having fun, it's not worth playing.
Yeah. Yeah. You
Hey, I
don't work
appreciate
baseball, you don't work
it.
sports, you play sports. Go play.
Exactly, exactly. And even the guys at the highest level are being paid to play a kid's game.
Yeah.
And so, John, I really appreciate your joining. This has been a tremendous conversation. Is there anything, one final thought or anything that you'd like to pass along to the audience?
I think from a coaching standpoint, like the best paycheck you'll ever get is a letter from a kid saying you made this my best season ever. And maybe only slightly better than that is a couple years later if you get a wedding invitation. And I've gotten to go to quite a few weddings and former players, and no one ever said, John, come to the most important event of my life. You taught me the 4-3-3 in soccer or something like that. Like, right? It's like you believed in me. You pushed me. You made me a better person, a better teammate, a better athlete, whatever. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. And then, for parents, like your child, they get one childhood. They don't get a do-over on childhood. So let it be driven by them. It doesn't mean that you don't have standards. It doesn't mean you can't have any expectations. You have to be really careful that your goals in sport don't become expectations of your kid, because it's their path. And if you do that, what you do is you threaten your relationship with your child. And I don't think anyone's going to take the time to listen to this going, man, you know what? I don't care if my kid hates me. They're going to the Olympics. I don't think anyone's listening, thinking that. So,
Nope, not at all. Well, hey, John, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
thank you, Derek.